Welcome to RSA Conference. We're recording live from Broadcast Alley here in Moscone West. This interview is sponsored by Apiiro. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and joining me today is Idan Plotnick, co-founder and CEO of Apiiro. Welcome, Idan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So I wanted to dive right in. We're talking about ASPM. And ASPM, sure, it's a bunch of letters put together. It's more than just a bunch of tools put together, too.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks, like, well, I've got this SAS, this DAS, these other acronyms. But I think ASPM done properly is more than just hooking a bunch of tools together, right?
Yeah, because these tools actually generate a lot of noise. They don't have the context of the business. They don't have the context of the application architecture. They don't understand the developer's knowledge and activity throughout the history. So this is why you actually need to take all these tools that are testing your code, and you need to contextualize them, and you need to understand what's the business impact to make sense. And out of the tens of thousands of noisy alerts, you need to understand what is actually a risk to your business.
And that's the important premise I really just wanted to highlight, because as you said, tens of thousands. There's so we could play Pokemon, collect all the vulns, all the CVEs, but we don't need to know all of them have to be fixed, right? The whole premise is just, where do I spend my time? And that's actually said from the developer's perspective, right?
Absolutely. This is why we developed a technology called a deep code analysis. This technology actually takes a code repo, scan it, understand the architecture of the code, and augment the vulnerabilities on top of them. Then enrich from runtime, context. Is it deployed? Is it internet exposed? And then we, from the DCA, the deep code analysis, we understand what's the business impact of this code module. And this is how we actually contextualize, deduplicate, and only then, if it's a risk to the business, we tell the developers fix that, because it's the most critical risk at the moment.
And that's what seems so appealing to me, is that you're saving developers time by doing what sounds like more than just, here's the abstract syntax tree of the app that we're building.
Exactly.
But we don't just stop there. We add this context. So, yeah, tell me more about this context and why that's so important for the developers.
Sure. So there are multiple layers of context. First and foremost, when you take code and you say, in this line of code you have a vulnerability, it doesn't make sense or to AppSec engineers or developers, because it doesn't mean that it will impact your business. If you say that this is a RESTful API in the code that uses a GenAI framework or a vulnerable open source dependency, on top of that, you augment the business impact of saying this handles PII data. Now the combination of all these things, this is a RESTful API that uses a GenAI framework in a code repo or a module with PII data that is deployed and internet exposed, and this is the context from runtime, then it's a risk that you need to fix right now. And if it's already deployed, you can attach it or tie it back to the code owner automatically.
That's huge.
Huge. In large enterprises, it's days or weeks to find the code owner and automatically trigger a remediation action to the developer that owns this piece of code or code components like RESTful API.
Yeah.
And with this risk-based context, you can also prevent the developers from merging their code, and not only based on CVSS score 10, because CVSS score 10 can be low risk in your code architecture.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, and I think I wanted to take that line of you're talking about the inventory, because you're saying who owns this. You know, they're very. I think you've been around AppSec for quite a while.
Yeah.
How many applications do we have? Classic problem, hard to answer.
It's
so
such a great point, because I think inventory in AppSec is a black box. No one knows. It's a simple question like, how many repos that I have with PII data? How many RESTful APIs I have in Java? No one knows. No one knows. So if you don't know what you have in your code bases and where this code is being deployed and delivered, how can you secure it? And we go back to ASPM. You said ASPM. Application Security Posture Management is the new shiny tool in RSA now. Everyone say that they are ASPM. There are actually three types of ASPM. The first one is the shallow aggregators that can take all the vulnerabilities and group them by
Here's your
CVE.
CVEs. Yeah. Okay.
The second type is the ones that started from software supply chain, like CI/CD pipeline, misconfiguration, or source control manager, posture management. And the last one are the deep ASPM that actually can build an inventory and maintain it for every code change and say, today you have new 5 APIs in Java. Yesterday, you added 3 different open API frameworks in your code. This is the depth that you need to take it and then prioritize and remediate with this context.
And that's absolutely where I hear value. I don't need to hear, here's another 5, or honestly, here's another 500 CVEs.
Exactly.
I'd rather know about those APIs. Like what's meaningful has changed within the code.
Yeah.
And you're talking about like those 3 types of ASPMs. I do want to bring in CSPM, the C for cloud part of this, and how does that relate? Because there is that aspect of inventory with cloud native apps, things like that, but that's still, I think, you need both. So tell us why.
This is a great question because the inventory of CSPM is a totally different inventory items from the ASPM. Okay, the ASPM takes into consideration your API in code and data models and PII and authentication framework and GenAI frameworks and more, while cloud posture management takes containers and firewalls, and these are different entities in your inventory. More than that, when you look at ASPM, ASPM track material changes in the code, and you can trigger proactively a pen test or a threat model before it gets to the cloud, and then you make your manual processes more efficient, much more efficient. You save time to developers, you save time to risk management and AppSec engineers, and you reduce the risk before releasing or delivering the code to the cloud.
And I appreciate that AppSec loves to talk about shifting left, right, all over the place. I appreciate that you haven't said that yet. Because one of the things I want to highlight is that ASPM sounds like it's reducing noise at scale rather than just throwing it back over to the AppSec team and say, was this a meaningful change or not? Should we spend this budget on a pen test? Was this just a UI change, back-end change?
This is a critical thing in AppSec. Because think about this. You have, let's take a mid-market enterprise, okay? They have 2,000 developers, okay? This is a mid-market enterprise. Every developer commits at least 2 or 3 commits a day. Open at least 1 or 2 open pull requests. A lot of changes. Why do I care about a UI change that changed the color of the login page? I don't care. But if you change the logic of an API, and this API is responsible for authentication, this needs to go through a pen test without bothering the development teams with tedious questions or risk assessment questionnaires that everyone lies when they ask them these questions.
Or they don't even have to lie. They say, well, today, this was the change, but tomorrow the change is different. It's dynamic, right?
So true. Yeah.
Well, then that's interesting, too. I was curious about who's consuming this? Because we're talking a lot about developers, but classically, the application security has the AppSec kind of in there. So is it AppSec team, developers?
So before I will answer, I just want to say that ASPM needs to be deep, but also open. You need to integrate with all the developers' tool chain, with all the risk management tools, and this is what, by the way, why we announced the Shine program. It's
that's what brings you to RSA.
Exactly. So now we are an open platform, but very deep, and we take, like, our user is the application security engineer that defines the governance, the policies, measure the MTTR versus SLA, identify the code owners, and shift, not left, shift the data with the context to the developers in their pull request, in their Jira ticket, in their Slack messages.
Where they're working, basically.
Exactly. If you want to maintain, think about the graph, okay? On one hand, you have the velocity of pull requests and commits and releases going up, while the risk is going down, okay? This is the measurement of a very, very good ASPM that needs to measure the development velocity, make sure that you're not impacting the business the developers of releasing more features,
Yeah.
but you are still reducing the risk without bothering them, and they can release more and more value to the business.
And it sounds like you're being able to reduce the risk by without having to put that checklist on the AppSec team to say, well, where is this running? Or do you agree, what's the environmental score of this CVSS? Change this context, right?
I think this is the key of the deep code analysis, the DCA technology that we developed. From deeply understanding what you have in the repo, we can match it to what you have in the pipeline and what you have in the a container, and we can connect directly to the Kubernetes cluster or to your CSPM, which you said earlier, and enrich more data from them and correlate it to what you have inside the code repo, and then do the code to runtime mapping automatically. A shallow ASPM will do it based on tags or naming
I see.
conventions.
Yeah.
But because we can actually understand what you have in the repo, we have much higher matching algorithm between code to build to runtime, and this gives the context that you are talking about. The environmental score of a vulnerability, or by the way, it's not only vulnerability, also a material change. If I change from SQL Server to a MongoDB, it's not a CVE, but it is a risk to your business. You change the entire database mechanism. So is it already deployed? Is it exposed to the internet? Did someone run a threat model on it or a pen test? This is like, do you see, like it's vulnerabilities in parallel to material changes.
And that's why I like to, because you mentioned Gen AI, and a lot of people are, you could walk the floor and we'll see AI enabled as well, along with everybody has ASPM platforms now.
Yeah.
But I think Gen AI has introduced a lot of people to the concern of, oh, right, we have to do something about data privacy or just data handling. And that's something that's parallel to security, but ASPM, I think, can help you with this, right?
Absolutely, and I will go back to what you said. Inventory. You go to every CISO and ask, do you know if your developers are using Gen AI technologies? No, I don't.
Right.
So when we scan the code with the DCA, we tell you how many, who added it, when, where, what's the posture of your Gen AI frameworks in the code, and if they are sending sensitive information to Gen AI services in the cloud. This is one angle, like the visibility.
Yeah.
The second angle is putting governance and say, okay, in my organization, you can use OpenAI for Java in this version. If not, you cannot merge the code and pass through the build phase. Okay? So a governance piece is very, very important for Gen AI risks. The third angle, which is very interesting, we are using actually LLMs to help with the triage and remediation process.
I see. Okay.
And also detect malicious code in different places. So these are the three buckets where we see ourselves interacting with AI across the board.
Yes, and even consuming AI, which is also nice to hear. And I think the other thing that I don't want to let go by too fast is that turning governance into something execution. Because I've seen a lot of governance that here's this policy doc and fill out this checklist or a spreadsheet. And this is, I love that
Apiiro
reaction.
ASPM, we are literally killing risk assessment questionnaires, and we show how much time you invest on them, you waste the developer's time and the risk management time, and eventually, as you said, it changes every day. So why doing it every 3 months? It doesn't make any sense, and it's not actually assessing the risk in a manner where you can prioritize your vulnerabilities.
And that's a perfect way for us to end talking about time. So this is a great time, Idan. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. To learn more about Apiiro, visit securityweekly.com/Apiiro. And stick around. We've got a lot more live interviews coming right after this break.